There are doors in the world that do not open with keys. Some open with questions, others with wonder, and then there are a few rare ones that open with stories. Imagine, if you will, a wardrobe not just of oak and hinges, but one that leads to forests where the trees whisper, animals speak, and the snow falls with a silence that almost sings. This is Narnia. But today, we're not asking whether the snow is cold or the lion is brave. We are asking a sharper question. Is Narnia halal or haram? It's a fair question, but fairness requires clarity. So let us begin not by judging what is seen, but by asking what it means. A child reads of a lion who dies so another may live. He returns to life not by trickery, but by the deep magic written before the dawn of time, a law of justice woven into the very world. Is this magic the same as the sorcery forbidden to us? Or is it a story's way of pointing to something greater, something that even angels marvel at? You see, when a tale teaches us courage, or shows us the beauty of sacrifice, or makes evil look exactly as ugly as it is, then it is not merely fantasy. It becomes in a quiet way a servant of truth. Not because every symbol is accurate, but because the heart behind it leans toward the light. Of course, the story includes witches and talking beasts, a wardrobe that's more than furniture, and kings and queens who were once schoolchildren. Are these elements not troubling? They can be if read without care. But we must ask, what does this story make me love? If it causes a child to admire nobility over cruelty, bravery over cowardice, selflessness over pride, then perhaps its forest is not so far from Eden. Yet discernment matters. Not all fantasy is innocent. Not all lions point to glory. Some stories glorify what should be condemned. So the reader must be awake, not wide-eyed in awe, but sharp-eyed in judgment. We are not asked to surrender our faith at the altar of fiction, but to bring our faith into how we interpret it. To condemn Narnia simply because it contains magic would be like condemning every parable that mentions a vineyard because wine is produced there. What matters most is not the vine but the voice that speaks through the vine. The question then is not, are there spells in Narnia, but rather, does Narnia cast a spell on your heart that draws it toward or away from the truth? Let us not become so afraid of stories that we forget the greatest story ever told, the one in which a prophet was placed in a well, another in a fish, and one even born without a father. The miraculous is not always fiction, and fiction, when it bows to truth, can sometimes carry us closer to the miraculous. So before we ask, haram ya halal, let us ask, does this make me more or less mindful of the light? If the answer is more, then perhaps that strange snowy land behind the wardrobe is not so strange after all. Imagination, though often dismissed as the realm of idle dreams and childish fancies, is in fact one of the most profound faculties given to the human soul. It does not exist to lead us away from truth, but to draw us closer to it, through angles reason alone may not reach. The mind calculates and compares, it measures, it deduces, it builds structures of logic, one brick upon another. But imagination does something altogether different. It leaps, it opens doors where reason finds only walls, it sees possibilities where logic might only see limits. This is not to say imagination contradicts truth. Rather, it can be the very language in which truth whispers to the heart. A parable, for instance, is not a historical account, but through it, moral realities shine more vividly than bare facts could convey. When a prophet tells the story of a poor man's lamb taken by a rich man, we know at once it's a story. And yet somehow that story makes justice burn more fiercely in us than a dry legal code ever could. Why? Because imagination paints the truth in colors the soul cannot ignore. Imagination is not the opposite of reality, it is its servant. It does not replace truth, but reveals it in deeper hues. When used rightly, it doesn't create illusions, but rather draws attention to something truer than what we call fact. Just as stained glass colors sunlight without blocking it, imagination adds shape and light to concepts that might otherwise remain cold and abstract. Consider a child reading a tale of good and evil, of a hero who lays down his life for his friends. The child may not be able to quote theological doctrine or understand the metaphysical structure of morality, but the story awakens something within him. He begins to love bravery, to admire sacrifice, to despise treachery. He sees the ugliness of pride not because someone explained it in a lecture, but because he saw it in the villain and felt it for himself. In that moment, he is learning what is true, perhaps more deeply than if he had simply been told. There is, in each of us, a longing for something more, for a world where justice is complete, where beauty is pure, where love is unbroken. This longing is not foolish, it is a signpost, and imagination is often the vehicle through which we glimpse what we are longing for. Stories awaken this yearning not to deceive us, but to show us that the thirst for meaning is not a weakness to be suppressed, but a clue to something real. It's easy to reduce imagination to mere escapism, but even escapism, properly understood, assumes there is something to escape to. Just as one escapes a prison to find freedom, the mind often wanders from the grey routine of life, not to deny reality, but to rediscover its beauty. The imagination brings new light to familiar truths. Through metaphor, allegory, and story, it teaches the soul in ways direct language cannot. A lion in a tale may say more about courage and kingship than 1,000 definitions. A winter that never ends may speak more powerfully of despair than any psychologist ever could. Of course, imagination can be misused, just as speech can lie and reason can manipulate. But its potential for distortion does not invalidate its power for illumination. In fact, the very fact that stories can move us so deeply is proof of their moral and emotional power. The question is not whether imagination is dangerous, but whether we are discerning in how we use it, and what it teaches us to love or despise. When guided by truth and governed by conscience, imagination becomes a lamp, not a shadow. It becomes the window through which abstract truth steps into the world of the heart. And the heart, once stirred by beauty and goodness, becomes more ready to receive the truth that was always waiting to be heard. A symbol is not the thing itself, it points beyond itself. It is a signpost, not a destination. And in the realm of literature, religion and imagination, symbols are essential. They are the brushstrokes of the unseen, the shape given to the abstract. The moment we confuse a symbol with the reality it signifies, we fall into error. This distinction between a symbol and a substitute is not just poetic or academic. It is moral, spiritual, and deeply human. In storytelling, especially in tales rich with allegory and metaphor, symbols are employed not to deceive, but to reveal. A lion is not God, but in a story, a lion may carry the scent of divinity. It may suggest majesty, courage, justice, or even sacrificial love. A garden may not be Eden itself, but it might echo that lost peace, that harmony between creation and creator. These images, when used with care and integrity, are not replacements for the truth but doorways into it. The symbol does not claim to be the reality. It reminds us that reality is often too vast to be expressed without metaphor. This is particularly important when dealing with religious truth or moral wisdom. Sacred texts themselves employ symbols. The Quran, the Bible, the teachings of sages, all make liberal use of metaphors: light and darkness, sheep and wolves, seeds and soil. The meaning is not diminished by the imagery. Rather, the imagery carries the meaning into the human heart. These symbols are not idols, they are vessels. They are not competitors with truth, but companions to it. The danger arises when a symbol is mistaken for a substitute, when we begin to worship the vessel instead of what it contains. This is idolatry in the broadest sense, not just the worship of statues, but the elevation of anything finite to the status of the infinite. It is the mistake of clinging to the image rather than the essence. In storytelling, this happens when readers take a lion in a fantasy world and accuse it of being a literal depiction of the divine, rather than understanding it as a symbol meant to awaken something deeper. Symbols are powerful precisely because they are not literal. They allow the heart to approach mysteries that reason alone may find unreachable. A character in a story who dies for the sake of another, rises again, and brings peace to a broken world, is not a theological treatise, it is a symbol. But the emotions it stirs, the thoughts it provokes, may draw the reader nearer to truths that doctrines alone cannot implant. This is not to say all symbols are good, or that all stories are pure. A symbol can also be used to distort, to seduce, or to subvert. Discernment is required. Just because something is symbolic does not make it harmless, but neither does its symbolic nature make it inherently dangerous. The test of a symbol is not whether it is fantastical or religious looking, but whether it orients the soul toward truth or away from it. Does it stir humility or pride, love or lust, justice or chaos? The question of halal or haram, when applied to symbolic literature, cannot be reduced to surface elements. A talking animal, a wand, or a mythical creature is not in itself evil or righteous. What matters is what these things stand for within the story's moral world. Are they promoting virtue or vice? Are they tools of selfless love or of arrogant rebellion? To be afraid of all symbols is to shut the door on a large portion of human communication and creativity. It is to render language itself nearly mute, for even our speech is built on symbols, letters, words, sounds that represent ideas far bigger than themselves. And in stories, as in speech, we must look through the symbol, not stop at it. Like windows, symbols are meant to be looked through, not at. The value of a creation, be it a painting, a story, a speech, or even a world built within pages, cannot be fully understood without knowing the intent behind it. A sword in a soldier's hand may be justice. The same sword in a thief's grip becomes a crime. So it is with stories. The visible elements, the characters, the settings, and the symbols are only the surface. Beneath them lies a question, far more important than appearance. What did the creator intend to communicate? Intent is the soul of creation. Just as the body alone cannot define a human being without the animating purpose of the soul, a story cannot be judged only by its material. The presence of mythical creatures, strange lands, or supernatural powers does not tell us whether a story is good or evil, beneficial or corrupting. We must look deeper into what these elements are used for, and what they are pointing toward. There are stories that contain darkness, yet serve the light. They expose evil, not to glorify it, but to show its ugliness, and the cost of surrendering to it. These stories do not tempt the soul into sin, rather they make sin look exactly as it is, hollow, poisonous and repulsive. On the other hand, there are stories full of beauty and light on the surface, but which beneath that surface lead the soul subtly away from truth.
The external alone cannot reveal the moral direction. It is the intent that reveals the compass. A creator may use imagination, not to escape truth, but to reflect it more clearly. Just as a parable is not a historical account, yet contains timeless wisdom, a fantasy tale may not be real, but its message may be. Intent, in this way, transforms fiction into a form of moral philosophy. When a lion dies for a traitor and returns to life, we are not meant to debate the biological accuracy of talking lions. We are meant to feel the weight of grace, justice, and redemption. That is intent shaping meaning. Think also of children learning lessons. Do they best understand courage from definitions in a textbook, or from a story in which a humble character stands up against fear, overcomes temptation, and chooses sacrifice over comfort? The story is not merely entertainment, it is a vehicle. The creator of such a story is not playing with fancies for their own sake, but using them to shape moral imagination, and this is no small task. The mind may be informed by facts, but the heart is often shaped by stories. The intent behind the creation is what separates manipulation from meaning. A storyteller can use drama and fantasy to distract, seduce, or numb the moral sense, or they can use the very same tools to awaken the soul, to stir the conscience, to call the reader toward higher things. Two tales may have similar scenes, magic, battles, strange lands, but their messages may differ entirely based on the heart of their author. This is why it is not enough to ask, what is in this story? We must also ask, why is it in this story? Is the miracle a sign of hope, or a shallow spectacle? Is the creature a metaphor for wisdom, or merely a distraction? Is the triumph of good a sincere conclusion, or a cynical trick? The answers to these questions lie not in the surface of the tale, but in the intent of the teller. Intent also governs how a reader should approach a work. To read a story that was meant to point toward truth, and dismiss it as foolishness, because of its fictional form, is to miss the forest for the trees. It is to treat the scaffolding as the house, and the signpost as the destination. When the creator's intent is to elevate, enlighten, and edify, even through fantasy or metaphor, the story itself becomes a kind of moral landscape, where each image is a step toward insight. There is a delicate yet vital line between magic and miracle, one that must be discerned with care and insight. At first glance they may seem alike. Both involve the suspension of natural laws, the appearance of the impossible, the arrival of power from beyond the ordinary world. But their essence, their source, and their moral direction are entirely different. Confusing the two can lead to misunderstanding not only stories and symbols, but the very nature of faith and reality. Magic, as commonly understood, is the attempt to manipulate unseen forces for personal gain. It originates from the will of the practitioner, and is often tied to the desire for control, dominance, or forbidden knowledge. Whether cloaked in the rituals of folklore, or the flashy spells of fiction, its root is human-centered. It implies a universe where power can be seized, bent, and wielded by those clever or bold enough to take it. Even when portrayed with charm or whimsy, this kind of magic is essentially about altering reality by one's own strength, not submitting to a higher one. Miracle, on the other hand, does not arise from man's will, but from God's. It is not summoned or controlled, it is granted. A miracle does not obey the desire of the creature, but flows from the will of the creator. It is not a trick of nature, but a revelation of divine power acting through nature, even if it bends or transcends natural law. A miracle does not seek to glorify the person who receives it, but to glorify the one who gives it. It is never detached from moral meaning. It points towards something greater: truth, mercy, justice, or hope. In stories, the distinction becomes blurred when readers mistake symbolic elements for theological declarations. If a lion in a story brings a character back to life, is that magic or miracle? It depends on the world of the story and the intent of the author. If the lion is a symbol of a divine figure, then his act is not a spell but an allegorical miracle. The act represents grace, not manipulation. The reader must ask not only what happens, but why and how it is framed. Who is glorified? What is taught? What values are affirmed? Too often, the presence of supernatural events in fiction causes concern in spiritual circles, especially when these events involve characters doing things we associate with forbidden practices, speaking spells, invoking ancient laws, using enchanted objects. But again, the question must be deeper than the surface. Is the story glorifying the hunger for power, or the humility of obedience? Is it making rebellion beautiful, or is it reminding us of the cost of evil and the triumph of selfless love? In some stories, what is called magic is not really magic at all. It is a metaphor, a deeper law that governs a fictional world, just as moral law governs ours. The use of such language does not mean the story is promoting sorcery. It may be simply speaking in the language of the imagination to convey truths too large for ordinary speech. Just as the stories of prophets include miraculous events, a staff that becomes a snake, sees that part, a child born without a father, these are not magic tricks, but signs of divine purpose, and they are never disconnected from moral order. What separates the two is ultimately orientation. Magic seeks power without submission. Miracle brings power through submission. Magic says, I will make it so. Miracle says, let it be as you will. One originates in pride, the other in humility. And so in discerning stories, we must look beyond the labels and ask, does this supernatural act reflect a universe ruled by wisdom and justice, or does it present a cosmos where the self is supreme? To judge rightly between magic and miracle in fiction, one must have a sense not only of theology, but of narrative ethics. What is the arc of the story? What is the moral heartbeat of the world it builds? Does it awaken gratitude and awe, or greed and self-glory? Does it mirror the humility of divine intervention, or the arrogance of human control? To discern whether something is good or harmful, wise or misleading, one must often wait, not to see how it was wrapped, but to see what it produces. Appearances deceive, forms mislead, but the fruits never lie. This principle, ancient and consistent across traditions, gives us a reliable lens for judgment. Just as we do not determine the health of a tree by the glossiness of its bark but by the quality of its fruit, we should not judge a book, a story, or an idea merely by its genre, symbols or aesthetic. We must ask, what kind of person does this work help form? This notion is not about passive consumption, but active evaluation. A story is not just a container of entertainment, it is a seed planted in the soil of the mind. Over time it grows. It shapes thought, reorients desire, and informs belief, whether quietly or loudly. So the question becomes, what kind of harvest does it yield? If a book encourages compassion, courage, humility, and love for truth, even if it does so through fantasy or fiction, then perhaps its fruit is good. If it inspires pride, cynicism, cruelty, or moral confusion, then its fruit must be questioned, regardless of how clean or neutral its appearance may be. It is easy to denounce a story for having dragons or witches, but more honest to ask, does it make me more kind or more cruel? Does it make me love goodness or just admire power? Some stories, though set in worlds far removed from ours, ignite virtues more powerfully than dry instructions ever could. They cause us to weep over injustice, to rejoice at mercy, to admire self-sacrifice, and scorn betrayal. The reader does not simply enjoy the tale, they are shaped by it. The narrative becomes a mirror, revealing our own fears, weaknesses, and hopes, and this shaping is often more permanent than the impact of a lecture or a rule. We know this already in practice. A child raised on stories of honesty and courage learns to value these traits. Another, raised on stories of deception and power worship, learns the opposite. The fruit does not lie. Even when the seed is imaginative, the result is real. What the story praises, the heart eventually pursues. What it mocks, the soul learns to reject. So the real question is not what symbols appear in the story, but what does the story teach us to admire or despise? It is also possible that some fruits take longer to ripen. A story may seem strange at first, or even uncomfortable, but over time, its lessons unfold. A scene of loss or betrayal might unsettle us, but then soften our hearts toward the suffering of others. A character's redemption may seem predictable, but later help us see our own failures with more honesty. Stories like these work slowly, quietly, but effectively. Like rain on dry ground, their fruit appears in due season. This principle also cautions us against judging too quickly, especially by superficial traits. A book with religious themes may in fact harden the heart through pride or self-righteousness. A work of fantasy, on the other hand, may deepen the reader's sense of justice and moral clarity. The fruit, not the cover, tells the truth. Of course, not all readers will experience the same fruit from the same book. This is why discernment must also be personal. We must ask ourselves, what do I become when I read this? Do I feel stirred to do good, or do I become numb to evil? Does this work humble me, or inflate me? Does it turn my attention outward toward the needs of others, or inward toward the cravings of self? The answers are not found in a table of contents, but in the soul's quiet response. There are few tragedies more subtle than mistaking the container for the content, the image for the meaning, or the metaphor for the message. It is entirely possible to encounter a story, a poem, a parable, or even a sacred text, and walk away having seen every surface detail, but miss the soul of the message entirely. This danger intensifies when readers focus on what they expect or fear to find, instead of what is actually being revealed. The result is not just misinterpretation, it is the complete reversal of the purpose for which the message was given in the first place. Stories, especially those told with layers of imagination, symbolism, and metaphor, demand a kind of reading that is both alert and humble. Alert to meaning, and humble before the possibility that meaning may not be immediately obvious. If a reader is too eager to condemn, they will find evidence to support their condemnation, even where none exists. If they are too eager to approve blindly, they may miss subtle dangers hidden beneath attractive appearances. Either way, the message is lost, not because it was not there, but because the reader's eyes were clouded. The risk of missing the message is greatest when our filters are made of fear or pride. Fear leads us to recoil from anything unfamiliar. Pride convinces us that we already know what a story means before we've listened to it. Both of these attitudes make true understanding impossible. A child who is taught that any tale involving a lion, a sword, or a spell is dangerous may never hear the deeper story being told beneath those symbols. They will see only danger, not meaning. On the other hand, a person who assumes every story labeled as spiritual is good may be seduced by messages that flatter the ego or distort truth. In both cases, the message is missed. A well-crafted story often uses what is seen to reveal what is unseen. It uses the outer world to speak to the inner one. If the reader is not prepared to look through the story rather than just at it, they are likely to focus on the outer features while ignoring what those features are pointing toward. In doing so, they may mistake a redemptive narrative for heresy simply because it includes fictional elements, or accept a destructive narrative simply because it avoids religious language. This danger is not theoretical, it has happened many times. Sacred stories themselves have been misunderstood in this way. The parables of prophets, which were meant to awaken hearts, were sometimes dismissed as nonsense, or even blasphemy, by those who insisted on literalness without imagination. Warnings in symbolic form were taken as entertainment. Invitations to humility were twisted into slogans for pride. And all because the message was buried under assumptions the listener refused to examine. Literary stories, especially those in the realm of myth and fantasy, are equally vulnerable to this misreading. A talking animal, a magical object, a fictional world, these are not signs of rebellion or idolatry. They are narrative devices. They speak in a symbolic language, just as poetry speaks in rhythm and metaphor. If the reader is unwilling to understand that language, the story becomes mute. The risk then is not that the story says something dangerous, but that the reader refuses to hear what it truly says. One must also consider the responsibility of the reader. Just as a farmer must work the soil to bring forth fruit, the reader must work with the text, ask questions, wrestle with meanings, and reflect honestly. Passive reading, especially of morally or spiritually rich stories, almost guarantees misunderstanding. A reader who brings nothing but suspicion to a story will leave with nothing but suspicion. A reader who brings openness without discernment may leave with confusion. But the one who reads slowly, with both imagination and reason, is far more likely to receive what the story was intended to give. Missing the message is not always a failure of intelligence. More often, it is a failure of posture, a refusal to be taught, to be surprised, to be moved. Stories, especially those grounded in the deep traditions of virtue and truth, have a way of working through the back doors of the soul. But if the doors are slammed shut by fear, dogma, or laziness, the story cannot enter. And then we are left holding the book, quoting the lines, even reciting the plot, yet having missed the point entirely.